Hello guys, welcome back to Not Just Mecha. It's Marco here, and today I'm speed painting like a 2D illustrator, working mostly with a brush. And the all-female Raiders Warband from Paradise, the upcoming post-apocalyptic waste-punk game by Mindwork Studio, is absolutely perfect for the practical needs of this exercise, and the clean smoothness of the render I'm chasing. We finally started seriously using artworks and references to paint our models. In the gaming space, still mostly to catch the structure and proportions of a specific color scheme. But in this case, the plan is to more aggressively, someone would say bluntly, translate the look of the artworks in 3D, in a way that's as faithful and literal as possible. And I'm not talking only about the look. That's just the tip of the iceberg, and more of a natural consequence, kind of a sub-product of the technical choices. This workflow and deconstruction of the painting process go deeper, and come from the idea that's becoming the core of my workshops and teaching about miniature painting in general, that painting is painting. It doesn't matter what canvas you use. For all these reasons, the most natural choice is to go for a white base that is going to play the role of the blank page, the exalting and dreadful obligatory starting point for any kind of illustrator. And following the drawing analogy, I don't consider this step as crude priming, but as a gentle initial investigation of the volumes, setting a mild zenithal light with a pass of light grey and then pure matte white. If I'm not working on full armies, I tend to simply do all my priming and color blocking with the airbrush. On my table, pen and compressor are always ready to go. I have a bunch of cheap, super opaque, colored options for priming. The whole process is easier to film, and for sure not a small tile of the puzzle. I live in Ireland, where the perfect conditions to finally spray outside rarely happen. But when it comes to extremely light or pure white priming, I always go back to spray cans. White paint in any form is always quite choky, but a good solvent-based can gives you the most uniform, smoothest and sleekest finish possible. Super important for when you want to render extremely clean subjects. Even in larger scale display painting, that's my go-to for smooth female skins, for example. Also, purely behind-the-scenes technical, the definitive models will be released in two versions. PVC for pure airborne gamers, and high-quality resin for painters and collectors. But here I'm working with pre-production 3D prints, and this solid, thick coat is very good at hiding the witness marks of the printing and its post-processing. This extremely simple step packs a bunch of painting wisdom, cross-media concepts and technical ideas, and a bit of history of miniature painting. But before going deep into all this, remember and etch in your mind that the most important ingredient on the palette is the matte medium. Whenever you use techniques in the range that go from transparent to semi-opaque, water may be the main dilution and transparency agent, but the medium is your magic ultimate weapon to adjust the density and consistency, stabilize the suspension of pigments, make the brushstrokes more flowy, homogeneous and easy to control, guide and make them stay precisely where you want them. So first, white is essential for mixing tones, add luminosity and climb the value scale. But when you start building up colors, especially in vibrant and saturated forms, it takes the role of a stupidly powerful desaturation agent. That's why oil and watercolor painters often immediately diminish this intrusive aspect, staining the canvas with a more colorful and characterful tone, based on the vibe and light of the scene. But we don't want to lose the high values, so we need to keep a very strong level of translucency to get both extra chroma and high luminosity at the same time. Second, on paper and canvas, this step is often followed by a rough interpretation of the main larger volumes of the subject. These can take the form of a super quick and light gestural sketching in pencil, a blurry impression of the major shapes in watery moving blotches of watercolors, or proper negative painting through the tactical removal of the imprimatura in oils. Here I'm using the natural properties of contrast paint to let it catch the volumes of the sculpt, and move around and into details and crevices. The only difference is that, having the sculpt to tell me where and what they are, basically like the outline of a coloring book. I don't have to invent and create those basic volumes from nothing, just make them visible. Third, depending on your age, you may remember this step from the late 2000 painting style for gaming. One of the big techniques at the time was washing white models with black or dark browns to make more visible and highlight their shapes and details. An approach that I honestly think is still better than Slapchop to get the same kind of information, but with a perfectly smooth, non-textured finish, and ironically less work. Fourth, the orangey yellowish color represents my strong environmental light, and every tone I'm going to put on top will be changed and influenced by it, totally like the dynamic mix that happens in the real world when you expose the local tone of an object to an ambient light. To make it simple, the same red t-shirt will look completely different under a warm summer sun, a cold winter day, or the neon lights of a club. Of course, in the real world, this happens in reverse, as light flowing over local hues, but the optical mixing coming from the semi-transparent layering is able to deliver a very similar effect and relations. And you'll see. Later I'm going to reinforce this concept and look even more bluntly, using the real chronological and physical order of events. At first glance, it may seem that here I'm just using contrast paints to block the base tones of the scheme, and that's for sure a part of it. But putting them on the palette and playing a lot, with their dilution and transparency open a bunch of new doors and interesting possibilities. What I'm chasing and trying to reproduce here is literally the lively behavior of watercolors. I cut the paint with a bunch of water and medium to make the impact and staining more gentle, again to keep most of my initial luminosity, and at the same time to get a bunch of random motion, sketchy energy and cool random artifacts. In watercolors, you accept and often actively push on a high degree of lack of control to get that iconic, unique kind of captivating visual richness and new information to work with. And here I'm following a similar logic, but knowing that, thanks to the 3D sculpt and physical nature of the canvas, that information will follow and flow in and around the existing shapes, making the randomness a bit less random, and more proactive in underlying forms and details. Small detour here. In the last video, I talked about moving the tone of the background of the illustrations to the bases to obtain a similar framing device, and an equally powerful source of contrast around the color scheme, or better, outfit of the characters. But in this case, that is simply not the story I want to tell. I want to indulge in the warm vibes of a Mad Max-inspired orangey desert, bleached by a powerful sunlight. And the use of contrasting cold tones can only weaken the character and message of that environment. So I trade chromatic contrast for a more powerful storytelling, more or less keeping the bases as they are until the end. Yes, this is a GW wash, don't panic. In the entirety of the life of the channel, this is probably the first or second time you see me using a pre-made wash, and that's because this is the real frequency with which I use them. And even if washes are way more gentle and less staining than contrast, when painting with the brush, I still never use them straight out of the pot, because I want to be in full control of their behavior, even when I'm chasing speed. This is my way to establish an extremely delicate tone on the skins, able to set in a very dynamic, almost automatic way on these gentle, round shapes. But more than anything else, consider this as the beginning of a pinch maneuver to connect and uniform the flow of the colors of the scheme, while pushing the environmental vibe even more. This is my attitude for every beat that, quote-unquote, enters a scene with very mild, neutral, pale local colors. The environmental information will do the heavy lifting in tinting those areas. Because of their mild and receptive nature, it's inevitable. So it will not be a surprise to see a representation of the yellow sun, hitting with a new application and extra saturation the upper parts of the models with a straight zenithal angle. And more subtle, it's diffusion and loss of power into darker midtones and initial shadows. In this situation full of diffused light, you can even consider this increment in orange hues as an extra new color bouncing back from the warm sand. And I use the same orange also to modulate and add extra variety to the skin tones, that I can easily push into darker skin tone territories, simply increasing opacity and saturation with extra passes. So this is the super rich base obtained using only translucent layering, from which I'm going to bring out details and textures, this time with opaque applications. My palette is very essential and almost one-to-one the same of the color blocking stage with contrast, because it's just the evolution of the same step, separated only for the technical needs of an efficient speed painting, where I have to optimize even the use of different levels of transparency in independent stages, easier to manage and focus on. I really want to underline this aspect, because teaching, I always see fellow painters overthinking this stage and focusing their attention on the wrong aspects of painting. Visually is the keyword here. Of course I accomplish a lot in this stage. You know the power of adding the eyes, or the crazy impact of a single edge highlight, basically just a line of a lighter color over a flat base tone, extremely well from the heavy metal style, for example. So the crazy amount of readability coming from a few textures and sharp lights should not be a surprise. But from the technical and theoretical point of view, this is the most plain and simple step. I just enhance and sharpen what's already here, but I'm not adding anything new. Scheme, ambient light, main volumes, illusion of size and dimension, they're all set up in the previous stages. What I'm doing here is making everything prettier, slightly more clean, and mostly more in focus. But the work is that simple and pretty quick if you let the base guide your brushstrokes, because there's literally nothing new to think about. I love to push on this because I'm a flow state junkie. And this lack of need for active mental processing is the best gateway into an amazingly stable and relaxing flow. A few flat, thin dark lines to represent scratches add a lot to the illustrational comic book look with zero effort. And I close the work, tightening again the pinch of lights and shadows over the local intrinsic structure of the colors. I'm actually very satisfied with the tones of my mid and extreme lights, that have remained in a solid, warm, yellowish state, thanks to the absence of pure white on the palette. White is always perceived as cold, especially on a base this warm, thanks to the magic of simultaneous contrast, so using only a light ivory for the highlights kept everything super tight. But even if I indulged a bit more than usual in the cleanup and definition of these lovely models, this was still a speed painting. So I've been quite sketchy and aggressive in the application of the opaque information. And this finishing stage really improves the general smoothness and the consistency of the flow of tones into the mild low midtones and shadows, with its aggressive glazing of the lower angles. Plus all the free, gentle overspray that happens around the edges of the application. And this is the final result. Ending up around the 8-9 hours of work, mostly because of the very small size of the models and their details, and because I was in the flow and I was having a bunch of fun. Last time I promised you a simpler, less convoluted painting flow, and I feel like I kept only half of that promise. From a procedural point of view, it is extremely accessible. If you watch it without the explanation, it looks quite linear, especially for my standard. But it turns out like that because of a lot of theoretical tuning. The key aspect to master is your control of the consistency and transparency of the paint, coming from the fascinating balance of paint, water and medium. And honestly, if you want to greatly speed up that specific mastery, I totally suggest you to do quick experiments on paper with watercolors, or probably even better, using contrast and or common acrylics as watercolors, so you don't even have that gap to fill when you'll translate the process in 3D with the same tools. If you like this video, give it a like and subscribe. Remember that you can ask me anything down below with a comment, you can follow my projects during the week using one of my socials, or watch me painting live on Twitch. Check the schedule of the streams on the Twitch homepage. And if you want to support my work, check my Patreon page and join the community, or maybe ask for a commission. See you next week, guys!